Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang saranang gacchami. Dhammang saranang gacchami. Sanghang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi bhutang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami. So welcome to tonight's talk, everyone. Tonight we'll be following on from the steps we talked about last night. Steps of mindfulness and breathing. And I just want to remind you that there are many different ways to practice mindfulness and breathing. The Buddha just outlined one way, and he described that way as the way he did it, the way he does it. And it's described in a way that one can arrive at complete awakening, noble awakening. And I think that it's relevant for noble awakening as well. What I mean by ennobling awakening is that we may not necessarily have the realization of nibbana, but we have significant ennobling awakenings nonetheless. Ennobling here means that we may not have the experience of nibbana, but we are having significant shifts in ways that are meaningful for us. Waking up to various patterns, for example, or waking up to various tendencies. And I'm a clinical psychologist, and I've worked with ennobling awakening in my life with individuals that come and visit me. And I could say that ennobling awakening is on the path to a full awakening, a noble awakening, yet it's not quite there. Nonetheless, it is therapeutic, it is healing in many respects. So I'm encouraging everyone to consider that this path that we're talking about here, this Noble Eightfold Path, is also an ennobling Eightfold Path. And the practice of the 16 steps of mindfulness and breathing is relevant for whatever level you want to take it at. I think it's healing and awakening in many different ways. I'm just saying that because I know we, in our discussions and in the talks, there's many terms that it may be something you've never heard before. And we may be talking about things that may be not relevant to you or not yet within your realm of understanding. But I'm emphasizing that regardless of that, it's all relevant. It's all really helpful. This talk will continue with the third tetrad from where we left off last night with the 10th step of superior gladness and the 12th step and the 11th step of samadhi. And we mentioned the 12th step, which is liberating mind. And tonight we'll be focusing on that 12th step. So here's the third tetrad again. One trains experiencing mind, I shall breathe in. One trains experiencing mind, I shall breathe out. One trains gladdening the mind, I shall breathe in. One trains gladdening the mind, I shall breathe out. One trains concentrating the mind, I shall breathe in. One trains concentrating the mind, I shall breathe out. One trains liberating mind, I shall breathe in. One trains liberating mind, I shall breathe out. So, liberating mind. Before I offer an interpretation of what the 12th step is about, in my opinion and in my understanding, let's explore what liberating mind might mean. And when I first read about this step, I wondered what was the difference between liberating mind and nibbana, the final goal of Buddhist meditation practice. It's the final complete freedom, psychological freedom. And if there were any differences. And if there weren't any difference, why was it positioned here only as the 12th step and not the 16th step, which is letting go to nibbana, the final step? Then I listened to Analayo's explanation of liberating mind. And the term that he used for liberation was vimutti. It's a Pali term. I've heard that term before. Vimutti, which holds significant meanings in the Pali, different meanings in the Pali discourses. And the term liberation of mind is referred to as cetto vimutti. And used on its own, it can refer to temporary freedom of mind from the hindrances, which is what happens in the states of absorption. Cetto vimutti refers to a kind of a temporary liberation. I think sometimes people use it as an ultimate liberation, but the way Analayo was explaining it, it is this temporary liberation. So we can have temporary liberations in absorptions, because in absorptions we're having free absorptions, the jhanas that I was talking about last night and throughout this retreat. When we become deeply concentrated, the hindrances are put away, they're in abeyance. But liberation only lasts as long as we're in that state. In that state, it's completely free, just like the Buddha was talking about when he experienced that state of nothingness and neither perception or non-perception. While he was in those states, completely liberating, but when he emerged out of them, that liberation wasn't enduring. He realized that's why he wasn't satisfied with the practices he learned from these first two teachers. So temporary liberation can also occur with the boundless divine abodes. With these boundless divine abodes, they're like we're relating to ourselves and others in a way that completely awakened beings relate to self and others. So when we can abide in these divine abodes, loving kindness or metta, compassion, appreciative joy, and equanimity, it's like we're abiding in freedom of heart. We're abiding in this cetto vimutti. It's a temporary liberation. For as long as we're in that, it's feeling there's a freedom of heart. So metta is temporary freedom from ill will. It's the direct opposite of ill will. Compassion is temporary freedom from the harming cruel mind. Appreciative joy is temporary freedom from discontent, and equanimity is temporary freedom from passion. And what I mean by passion here is both aversion for the unpleasant and craving for the pleasant. So there's these liberations of the heart when we're in these abodes, and but it's temporary. There was a sutta I studied. I've studied it. I've listened to it and read about it a few times. When I say I listened to it, I listened to it described with a retreat I did with Lee Brasington. Anyway, it's called the Gadatta Sutta, and it involves a venerable monk called Gadatta asking an accomplished layperson called Chitta about the heart's release. He was asking how 4 meditations varied and were similar or dissimilar. Specifically, he asked, and I'm just going to quote the sutta here, "Householder, the limitless release of the heart and the release of the heart through nothingness and the release of the heart through emptiness and the release of the silence release of the heart, do these things differ in both meaning and phrasing, or do they mean the same thing and differ only in phrasing?" And this is Chitta's response. "Sir, there is a way in which these things differ in both meaning and phrasing, but there's also a way in which they mean the same thing and differ only in phrasing. And what's in the way? What's the way in which Gadatta asked, what is the way which these things differ in both meaning and phrasing?" So I checked out the words in Pali. Now, the limitless release of the heart is referred to the divine abodes. The release of the heart through nothingness is referred to that 7th jhana that I was talking about last night, like the state of profound samadhi. The release of the heart through emptiness means the discernment of emptiness, the discernment, seeing emptiness in things, seeing that there's no thing in all this. There's just streams of dependently arising processes interacting. And the meaning of the silence release of the heart refers to seeing signlessness. And if you're here on Thursday, I'll be talking about signlessness a bit more. I'll be referring to the Bahya Sutta. And what it means is that we're meditating on not on the perceptions of things, but we're meditating on the experience of the senses prior to conceptualization, prior to putting a sign on the things we're seeing, hearing, smelling, touching, tasting, and mentalizing, if that makes sense. So I checked out what words in the Pali. I read that sutta in English, and if you go on Sutta Central, you can read it in Pali as well. So you have Sutta Central is pretty fantastic, set up by Venerable Sujata, who I went and did a retreat with a couple of weeks ago. Anyway, I checked out what the words were for heart's release, and it was Ceto Vumutti, and which is the same for temporary liberation. And this term has been also translated as the limitless release of the heart. So in the sutta, Chitta says that the 4 boundless divine abodes can provide this, as well as the very refined states of concentration with the absorptions of nothingness. And these two ways could be considered as ways of serenity. We're talking about the difference between serenity and insight. And these 2 particular ways are a serenity way of realizing temporary liberation. And Chitta also said the discernment of emptiness results in a liberated heart, as well as the awareness that is signless. So these other 2, emptiness, is more aligned with the insight way of meditation. And I don't know if you can remember this. It was pretty fuzzy back on Saturday when I was giving a talk about the differences between serenity and insight. The serenity pathway is considered as directed meditations because we're moving towards an object, and yes, we're directing our mind on an object, or we're having it in a particular direction. Whereas the insight approach is considered as undirected meditation, in that we're not directing our mind at anything really. We're discerning, we're sitting back and we're seeing things, we're insighting into experience. So it's not completely passive, but it's not directed, if that makes sense. So the first one, the divine abodes, the emptiness, the release of the heart through the heart's release, the release of the heart through the divine abodes is one way. The release of the heart through nothingness, that deep state of concentration, the jhana of nothingness. And we can also have a release of the heart, this temporary liberation, through the discernment of emptiness, which is insight-based, and as well as signlessness. There is a meditation I'll be talking about on Thursday and inviting you to, which is it's called signless samadhi, which is your mind is gathered, but it's not on anything. It's just hovering on the perception of the senses, not the perception, sorry, the raw experience of the senses. So these four meditations, or these four practices, they can differ in phrasing and practice, but they are similar in what results. In all practices, they result in this freedom of heart, this temporary freedom. So this morning, I invited you to 12 steps of mindfulness breathing. And we kind of stayed with the 11th step for quite a while. I invited you to go into silence or go into the depths of samadhi, to the extent that it was relevant for you, and whatever way you did that. And being in that samadhi, you may have felt some sort of liberation of the heart. You may have felt some temporary liberation, to whatever extent it was possible for you. So we then we went into this 12th step, which is liberating the mind. And I invited you to experience a liberated mind as the result of serenity meditation. Does that make sense, or is that meaningful for you? Yeah. So when I was studying this practice with Analia, he said, well, you can go this serenity way from that position, or you can go the insight way. And the insight way he talked about was seeing the emptiness of what we call the ego. Seeing the emptiness of ego, being liberated from our sense of that. It's actually a burden. We carry around this ego, and it is quite a burden sometimes. It's really heavy. To let it go is liberating. Once we can see the emptiness of it, we can have a liberation of the heart, a liberation of the mind. So in Buddhism, the ego is probably best understood as, I know there's lots of definitions of ego in psychology, there's Freud and through other people. But in Buddhism, it's probably best understood as this conceit, I am. I am this and I am that. And that is, we create a self-concept about ourselves, or that's what a self-concept is, and then we cling to it and identify with it. In Pali, and I want to give you the Pali term because it's meaningful. In Pali, this self-conceiving is called mana, M-A-N-A, mana, which literally translates as to measure. And we tend to measure ourselves up against ourselves at different times, like an ideal self, an ideal self, the way we want to be, or the way we were in the past at some stage. We're either better than we were, or worse than we were, or the same as we were. And we also tend to measure ourselves up against other people. We compare. We get this sense of, comparing with others. And we're either better, worse, or the same. And in this way, we're kind of creating a sense of self, which is interesting. So we are either better, worse, or the same. And as well as the I am conceit that we tend to hold on to, we cling to views about ourselves with the term myself. This is myself. This is my view. And experience and events that come our way, and we tend to call them mine. Like I'm sitting here now, I'm giving you my Dharma talk. And this is my computer. That is my camera. And we have a tendency to appropriate all sorts of things, like my computer, my camera, my children. I'm calling them mine. We have this tendency. It's just this tendency comes out of this conceit I am. Actually, it's craving. And I have my livelihood, my profession, my computer, my hut. I've got a hut at home where I meditate in. And we tend to relate to life with a constant self-reinforcing, or a lot of clinging to I aming. And it is mining, and it is according to my selfing. I don't know if that makes sense. I'm talking about views, concepts, self-concepts in this case, and craving. And it has a lot of dukkha. It has a lot of suffering when we continually going around having concepts about ourselves that we cling to, because these concepts will change. And in neuroscience, tendency is called selfing. It's really interesting. No one influenced by Buddhism to say this. It's called selfing. Selfing is where we get caught up in the belief of self-referencing. We start to believe our ideas, confabulations, fantasies, and paranoias as fact, as reality. We were talking about this the other night. We reify our thoughts as something lasting and as me, mine, and myself. With our seemingly endless mind chatter, it's like we create fictitious stories about ourselves and believe them to be true. I don't know if anybody can relate to that. I'm seeing a few nods. Interestingly, neuroscience is beginning to catch up with Buddhist insights. And neuroscience can't find a single place where consciousness is in the brain. I mean, people are trying to do that. However, they are discovering that this idea of a separate self is related to particular functions of the brain. In one book called No Self, No Problem, How Neuroscience is Catching Up with Buddhism by Chris Neuberger, neuroscience is beginning to call this constructed self a fiction. And it's created by the default mode networking and left hemispheric dominance and language centers. Now, some of you may know what the default mode networking is. I'll try to explain it. It's a network process that happens in the top of our brain and involves a number of structures. And the networking has an evolutionary basis. It's where it's where we develop that sense of, you know, did I mention something called negativity bias the other day? I did mention it, so I won't repeat what negativity bias is about. But it has an evolutionary function. It kind of works in a way where we can do things efficiently. It's like getting us into autopilot mode. So we can effectively and efficiently do things. There's another function with default mode networking. I was reading about this. It's got something to do with thinking about where we are in our social circumstances, in our social world. Because where we position ourselves in that, imagine the 50 person or the 100 person village of, 6,000 years ago. This 100 person village was very important to know where we were in the village because we needed to get along. And if we were rejected from the village, it probably could have meant death. So it's a point of survival. So we're constantly kind of trying to think, well, how am I in this community, or how am I in this relationship, or what are people thinking about me? What am I thinking about myself? Where am I positioned in this world? So this function of default mode networking turns into a continual sense of creating a sense of self, a selfing. They were doing some experiments. They were doing some studies on default mode networking. And what they did was they asked a bunch of college students, which are, psychology students probably. They asked them to go into I think it was an MRI machine, or it might have been I'm not sure if it was an EEG. Was it an MRI, or I can't remember now. Yeah, fMRI, yeah. So they looked at what was happening in their brain, and they just asked them to go into this machine and just wait there, do nothing. And they noticed that the default mode networking, this area of the brain, started to light up. You would think that when you're doing nothing, nothing happens. But no, when you're doing nothing, like when you're just sitting around, say meditating, doing nothing, you think it activates this default mode networking. And when they pull them out of the machine, they asked them what they were thinking about. And they started thinking about how they were in their relationships, whether their girlfriend or boyfriend liked them, or, whether somebody else was considering they were an idiot, or what they thought about other people. So all this kind of comparison and measuring up against others and themselves. So it's this default mode networking is a function of the brain, which is activated when we do not need to do anything. This book I read about it, they said it's because we need to work out who and what we are in our social communities, that when we're doing nothing, it's like we have that opportunity to think about it. The default mode gets activated. And you'd think it would be relaxing, but no, it doesn't. It kind of ramps things up. And it ramps things up with mental proliferations. And it was part of evolution. It had a positive impact on our lives and helped us survive. But now what happens is this default mode networking is associated with increased anxiety, depression, and a whole range of other forms of suffering. And the studies they've been doing with meditators, for example, is that there's less, and the default mode networking engages less. And there's a greater sense of altruism rather than a sort of self-focused attention. There's self-obsession with our own mind movies. When you sit and do nothing, do you ever think about yourself? When you dream and think, are you always the star of your mind movies? Does that happen to you? Well, what happens with meditators, and they've done this with just an 8-week course sometimes, there's a less engagement with the default mode networking because we're concentrating on something else. And people come out of that being less self-obsessed. There's a greater sense of letting go of being at the center of the universe. That makes sense. So we're always thinking about how I am and how I stand in relationship to others and the world. So this default mode networking is all about selfing, and it's all about constantly reinforcing this sense of I am. And as we've just spoken about, it is a sense of creating a self-concept and clinging to it as me, I, and myself. And there's a lot of suffering in that, especially when I think of, say, I'm a fantastic Dharma teacher. I might have that self-concept arise, and I cling to it. And then I give a really lousy Dharma talk, and I go back to my room and I go, oh God, what a terrible Dharma talk. I mucked it up in so many different ways. I have a lot of suffering. Mind you, we have these self-concepts and they're functional. We need self-concepts to function in the world, and they're very helpful. Like, it's very helpful to think sometimes of being a I have a self-concept that I'm a granddad. I try not to cling to it too much, but I like to work as a granddad, because if I said I was something else, if I said to my grandchildren, look, I'm not really a granddad, I'm just this, what is it? Streams of dependently arising processes interacting. They would think I was mad. They would, what are you talking about, granddad? A granddad. So, and I act like a granddad. I work through that role, and it's very helpful. And the same as a psychologist. I have a self-concept that I'm a psychologist, and I go and do my job, and people come to me. And if I told them, no, I'm not really a psychologist, I'm nothing, they would be feeling very disoriented and somewhat confused, I think. Now, one time, some people were criticizing the Buddha, and they came to him and they said, why are you using these terms, me and I, and all these other terms about who you are? Actually, he didn't use that too many times, but I think sometimes he would have used the, I'm going to do something. And he said, well, I use those terms because of social convenience, but I'm not deluded by them. I'm not confused by them. And that's the distinction. What we have is we have a self-concept and we can use it, but if we get confused by it and identify with it and cling to it, we're destined to suffer, especially when someone criticizes us, especially when our egos get hurt. So coming back to neuroscience, the Buddha knew nothing about neuroscience. There was no such thing in his time. However, he did know about fetters that hold us back from enlightenment or hold us back from waking up. And mana is a fetter. A fetter is, something that holds you back. It holds us back from enlightenment. It is self-conceiving taken personally. And it is as if it is an entity and a permanent independent self. We're kind of deluded by it. It's this process of self-conceiving. The Buddha taught about not self. That is, there is no independent entities, but causes and conditions that give rise to the illusion of a separate lasting entity. And I just mentioned when the Buddha was challenged about using the terms I, mine, and myself, he responded by saying it was just a matter of social convenience. He didn't deny the existence of itself. He just said it wasn't as we think it is. It's not a permanent, lasting thing. It's a process, a stream of dependently arising processes interacting. So we can't really thingify it. And this helps us shift from being at the center of the universe to a more altruistic perspective. And in this way, we kind of gain a greater perspective. So when we're talking about liberating the mind, when we can take the me and my making out of our experience of the life and the world, we are aware of causes and conditions, and we begin to let go of this ego. And it's really helpful. Think about when someone hurls criticism at you. You know, they say, you're a terrible psychologist, or you give really lousy Dharma talks, or whatever it is. I don't know about you, that sort of thing hurts me. It hurts. You know, my partner, she has a way of hanging out the clothes, and I hang out the clothes, and she takes them down and does them again. She says, that's not the way you hang out clothes, Malcolm. When you hang out clothes like that, it's kind of, you make them more ruffled, and it's better to hang out clothes the way I do it. And I mean, she's a really loving person, and she offers good advice, and she gives really good criticism, really wholesome criticism. And sometimes when she does, like, Malcolm, you don't do it like that. You do it like this. Even fixing the gate. Malcolm, it's better to do it this way. And I kind of, oh yeah, all right. There is a little bit of a hurt there, but I know she's not trying to hurt me, but my ego is bruised a little bit. And I'm sure you all know this experience. If we can look at that ego being bruised and look at what's happening here, it's actually our self-concept that's being hurt. And the only pain comes from clinging to that self-concept. Does that make sense? When I was in Thailand, wow, I remember it quite often. I was living in a temple. There was no other no other English-speaking people in this, monastics in this monastery. And Thai is a tricky language. I mean, if you say the wrong tone, you know, it can mean something completely different. And I know that they sometimes would laugh at me. And also they'd laugh at the way I did things, like, and they'd come and correct me. No, you don't sweep like that. You sweep like this. No, you don't sweep like this. You sweep like this. And no, you don't fold up your robes like that. You fold up your robes like this. There was always some sort of criticism. Not always, you know, mostly they were very supportive. And I just remember Achan Ben, my teacher, he just came up to me one time and said, who's suffering? Who's getting caught here? Where is the self that's suffering? Yunai means, where is it? And one has to reflect, what is it that's being hurt here? What is it? You could say, oh, my pride's being hurt. But if you look clearly and deeply inside, it is this self-concept. It is mana, this sense of I, sense of me, the sense of mine. So this, yeah. No. Oh well, no. I hope that's not what I'm not saying something like that. What I'm saying is, what we do is we create a sense of self, and we create it with our concepts, and we cling to that sense of self. I mean, what other people say and do about us, you know, other people could hurl criticism at us, like really nasty stuff. and we can get really hurt. However, if we drop this clinging to a sense of self, we can see clearly through it. We actually develop a lot more equanimity about it, meaning we're unshaken by it. And we can see it for what it is. You know, that person is actually hurling criticism. They're being quite aggressive or nasty to us, but it's actually, they're being nasty to their own projection of what they see us as. Like, I'm looking at you and you're looking at me. What I'm seeing is my projection of you, my concept of you. My concept of you is completely different than your own concept of you. And so I could criticize something about you. And I've had, when I worked in mental health services, we'd have sometimes people coming in. One day, one person came in and said, "You're a crappy psychologist. You don't know what to do. You don't know what you're doing. You've got no idea." And I could see this person was deluded. I knew they were deluded. And I just didn't take it on board. It just kind of went like this. I sat there and listened to him. And, you know, eventually we started talking about what he was angry about. And it, you know, we came to terms. But I wasn't affected by it because I could see that that was his projection. So the reason I wasn't affected was because I wasn't clinging to this idea that he was wise and he knew exactly how I was. And I wasn't clinging to this idea that I had to fulfill his projection of me as a good psychologist. I didn't have to do that. I could just be as I am. I don't know if that makes sense or not. Does that make sense, Lorraine? Yeah, you know, monasteries, people think they're really harmonious places. They are. They're pretty good. But, you know, certainly it's like rubbing potatoes together. Like they say, there's a saying in, Achan Chah used to talk about this, like a bunch of people get together and they're all in a group, and some people it's like rubbing potatoes together in that they become clean, but in the rubbing together, there's a kind of a bit of friction, if that makes sense. It's not perfectly harmonious and loving in these environments. But my teacher was pretty cool. I mean, he was kind of like a step above these other practitioners. They weren't all enlightened. No, they were all just these people trying to be enlightened. You know, ideally one lives in an atmosphere of loving kindness and harmony, but people were critical. You know, I was only young in that monastery. And it was almost like this other monastic, he was being competitive with me. And I didn't take it on board. I didn't take it personally. He was kind of one-up me all the time. And then one day, Achan sent him off. And I was having a difficult time with him. And I think Achan noticed this. So he just sent him off to another monastery. I don't know if he did. He just disappeared one day. And I thought, oh, well, that's a relief. But, you know, they do that sort of thing, you know. And when my teacher was talking to me, he was motivated by compassion. He wanted me to be free from suffering. So he asked me, where's the self? Where's the self that's, you know, suffering from all this? Where's the self that's having a problem? And it initiated an inquiry into what's going on. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It can shift to like my client, or, you know, it wasn't my client, it was a client of our services. Like when that client comes in to see me and starts abusing me. I've had clients assault me. I had my tooth broken from a client punching me one time. But, you know, what shifted with my client that was verbally abusing me was I wasn't reacting to him because I knew he was driven by his delusional perspective of me. And so I just sat and listened to him. And eventually, you know, I felt like I was having compassion towards him. And he eventually kind of toned down and he slowed down, and we managed to talk. Because if I was aggressive, I was reacting to him, it would have just amplified the situation. So I better continue on with my script. Oh, look, it's only 10 to 6 and I'm not even halfway through. Save up any questions for when we come back. So there are many ways we can let go of this sense of clinging. There are many ways. And one way we can let go of this sense of clinging is to notice that when our ego is suffering, ask ourselves, where is it suffering? How is it suffering? What's behind that? And ask yourself, where is it? And if you can look deeply, you can see it's just a mental construct about ourselves. And notice the grip and the clinging you have on this self-concept. And see if you can let go of the grip. A strategy that I learned from Analio was to simply be aware of it and the dukkha of clinging to it and drop it. He talked about releasing the clinging like dry leaves dropping off a deciduous tree, being effortless. And it kind of works like that. There was one night I was on a retreat. I was in my hut, actually. I was doing a month retreat at home, which is sort of working out. Anyway, I was in my hut and I got up at 3 a.m. in the morning and I was just worrying about something. I was sitting in my hut, you know, it might have been raining as well. It's just really quiet everywhere else. I was just worrying about something. I can't even remember what I was worrying about. And I kind of noted worried, but I went a bit deeper and I thought, where's this coming from? And it was coming from this story of myself. Like, you know, born a long time back, and there was this story of myself about doing something a few days previously, and I just got so caught up in it. But I could see clearly it was about this self-concept. And what I did was I just let it go, like effortlessly dropping the leaves, like a tree drops the leaves, drops dry leaves from its branches in winter, a deciduous tree anyway, effortlessly. It was just kind of like in the seeing that this is just self-concept. This is just self-conceiving and I'm clinging to it. And it was such a relief. It was such a burden off my shoulders. It was so freeing. And I do this often when I'm meditating. I'll be meditating and I'll bring up the story of my life. You know, Malcolm born 1956 and done this and done that. And, you know, when you introduce someone or introduce yourself, they always want to know, tell me about you. What do you do? You know, tell me about you. And you kind of want to know that. But if you look closely at that, it's just a story. It's just a story. And if you can release it, what we come back to is just this, just here now, this reality. And it's really freeing. I invite you to, for the moment, drop that self-conceiving in that moment. When you're meditating, you can just let it go, like putting aside worries and concerns, putting aside roles and responsibilities, putting aside the ego for the moment. You don't need it right now when you're sitting. You can just sort of let it go. And it is liberating. It kind of boils down to the basic principles of realizing that when we cling to an ego, the clinging will bring suffering. That's a basic principle in Buddhism. Clinging causes suffering. When you can let go, you can have freedom. When I was in Thailand many, many years ago, I was talking to an elderly monk just about stuff, just about life and practice and so on. And he picked up a toothpick and he said, the tighter you hold onto this toothpick, the more it hurts. You let it go, there's no pain. There's no tenderness. Even as something as little as a toothpick, to cling on to it causes pain. So to cling on to our self-stories, our fictitious self, our ideas about ourselves, is painful, is suffering. And to let it go is to release it, is to find freedom. Please don't get worried if you still got an ego. It's okay. It's the 8th fetter, and I'll be giving a talk on awakening on Thursday night, and I'll be talking about how the last 5 fetters, there's 10 fetters that I'll list out for you. The last 5 fetters are only released with full awakening. But so don't worry. You're okay if you're still clinging to an ego. It won't disappear until full awakening, and I don't know if anybody's fully awake here. I know I'm not. So, but the thing is, to the extent that you can let go of clinging to it, to that extent you will have freedom. Even if you're not fully awakened, it kind of releases a burden. I do really like the way Analia used to talk about it as letting go of the burden of the ego. And it is a real burden. When you can let it go of all that story, all the baggage you're carrying around, even if it's just for a moment, it's such a relief. So where are we up to? Oh, nearly up to the end. It's 2 minutes to 6. We're nearly there. So in summary, temporary liberation in the 12th step can come about by absorbing into that 11th step, which is samadhi, like going into freedom from suffering, or liberation of the mind. I should say liberating mind. You can go into it with that the temporary liberation of samadhi, or you can go into it with the temporary liberation of discerning emptiness, which is seeing that this mental construction is just a mental construction. It's just a fabrication. And it's not, we don't have to take it personally. We don't have to believe in it. All we need to do is see it. And we become completely present. We wake up to that moment, completely present, just this. I think that's enough for tonight's talk. As always, I am grateful for your attentiveness. Thank you.